Hey everybody, let's hear it again for In Our Nature. As promised, we have some people here from the film, or at least one. Thanks a lot. Let's welcome James Parker, director and co-producer. Thanks a lot for joining us and bringing your friends.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, we've got...
Come on up, Brock.
There we go. Yeah, we don't want them sitting alone.
Hey, good to meet you. Just kidding.
I am Brock.
Brock. An amazing film. So much wonderful information and education. Truly, I mean, not just the... that's one of the wonderful things about being a part of this film festival is just the amount of education that can come through the stories and the films that are made, sharing the stories, sharing the causes or the organizations, parts of people's lives or traumas that they go through. One thing that really resonated with me through a lot of the films tonight, but the grass, these fields just left to waste away, grass and plants just find a way to grow through the cracks of the concrete, and just like taking care of the animals in some of the other films, or taking care of the people or the trauma that they've gone through, just that little bit of care, that little bit of opportunity. It's kind of the same illustration there. The people working with their way through their traumas, or coming up through the cracks, or through a thrown aside community or part of town. Really beautiful.
Thank you.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
What led you to this project?
Yeah, so it was almost 2 years ago now. My co-producer and I, Juliet Grable, we were curious about two things in particular. One was that we were seeing these trends of more and more time spent on screens in children, on average 7 hours a day, sometimes much more than that, and less than 5 minutes outside. And these are the averages, and then that coupled with an increasing partisanship around nature and environmental education, as mentioned in the film, where sort of the consequence of that being that some children have access to nature and environmental education and some children do not, based on, the parents' political stripe, or where in the country, you happen to live. And so that just, made us wonder, like, what does this mean for the future of humans, in 5 years, in 20 years, in 50 years? Because surely it doesn't seem like the trends of screen time are going to reverse. If anything, we're being drawn more and more into screens. And
I think a lot of us have seen the film WALL-E.
Yeah, exactly.
It's you could go back and watch it and not think it was funny at all anymore.
Yeah.
When it came out, it was, not a joke, but maybe not something you thought would be real. But are we heading towards that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it seems like in some ways we are, but I think for us, the movie it's not anti-technology in any way. I think technology is a wonderful thing. It's just like Richard Louv says in the movie, like, the more technology that we have, the more nature that we need. And especially in divided times where there's a lot of partisanship, this is one of the most actionable tools that we have, nature. Yeah. And as you see in the movie, it can be applied to whatever issue you might be interested in. I mean, if it's an environmental issue, if it's biodiversity, nature can be a wonderful solution, engaging people around nature. But also if it's like a community building, or an economic concern, or all of the different issues that are covered in the movie, nature is the through line. And so I think that's one of the points of the movie.
Yeah, there was a question that came up for me as I was watching it again, was, wait a minute, in some ways before I watched it again tonight, I was thinking or explaining that the film was about that technology, that disconnection, and it's really only touched on a few times. So you made a conscious decision to not like make a film about kind of going out that we got to cut screen time thing.
Yeah, right. Because I don't think you have to. You don't have to attack in order to make the case. Like
Right.
nature. It's something. In some ways, when I sit and I watch the movie, it's sort of like, wow, this is kind of weird that we have to remind ourselves to connect to nature, because it's fundamental to who each of us is, our biology, and it's the common denominator that we all have. But it's so easy today to get to lose sight of that, and to get drawn into the algorithms or the screens, and in the process of that, we lose connection to ourselves and we lose connection to each other.
I'm sure there was a lot of scientific information that you just had to step away from, or couldn't quite fit into the film to make it a reasonable length film. But I think if I saw somewhere, it was like, I'm Generation X, so we had to deal with all kinds of problems. We had to just go outside. It was outside 90% of the time, probably. And I saw a study about how dangerous jungle gyms and a lot of playground equipment was, and it's like we should bring that back because it actually allowed people to kind of get hurt and figure out how to. So did any of that come through in the studies of people going together into nature and problem solving or discovering and that reconnecting kids to each other, collaborating rather than texting across the table, as somebody was talking about earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of studies. I wish I could cite the specific ones, but the imperfection of nature, the experience of going out and discovering, and like teaching kids to be curious. It's not, maybe that's something that is. It starts off, maybe we have it kind of instinctually, but I don't, unless it's like nurtured and stimulated, we're maybe not encouraged to be curious. But being out in nature, whether it's on a playground in kind of a contrived nature environment, or if it's out in Yosemite, you can't help but be curious. Like, wow, how did this all come to be? Or how does that animal survive here? Or what if I went and tried to climb that tree? All that type of stuff. I think it is so critical to the especially to developing humans, but also to us as adults.
Right, and I'm sure you possibly had some revelations in yourself through these travels. Brock, anything that stood out, and well, this is where we're going with the story, but now this is where we've gone, or we've got to include this, or a discovery.
Yeah, it was like a really interesting journey. I did a lot of the assistant editing with James. So when he came back from each one of his locations and each one of his kind of journeys of trying to pull these stories out of these locations, we were like, okay, cool, what do we do with this now? And then as we developed that story and kind of found it, it started actually connecting more personally, I think, to each of us, to be like, oh my gosh, like seeing some of these kids heal through nature in a totally different like ideology than someone in Kentucky as well. And these two worlds kind of coming together with this common focus. Like that was always something that we came back to in each one of these story pods. It was like, oh, like nature's the thing that can always connect us. And that was, I don't know, you still walk with it day to day, kind of going through 6 months of going through interviews. And going crazy,
I got to say that 2 years is actually super short for a documentary. People, that's you guys blazed through, and then the editing kept the movie moving. Documentary making is really hard, and that the editing back and forth. There was a lot of great movement in this edit, I got to say. We want to take some questions from the audience. All right, down here in front.
First of all, thank you for the work, and thank you for emailing Solana Center. The statistic at the end about the reduction in the funding for environmental education in public schools, first of all, I was pretty astounding, the cost of a pen. How, when it comes to funding, does the government define environmental education?
That's a great question, and as you know in your work, it's difficult to define environmental education. So many people. I mean, the movie opens with Griffith, who's a lifelong environmental educator, sort of admitting that he can't even define it, and so it makes it really tough to create categories that then federal government or big institutions can fund. I'm not sure I know the answer, of how officially the government defines environmental education, but that particular statistic, and there's not many statistics out there about funding around environmental education, but that was taken from the total amount of money spent on a child in public school in the U.S., which there is a lot of research on. It's about $18,000 a year, and then the environmental education figure came from EPA funded grants to environmental education, which is really kind of the main mechanism of federal government, providing funding for EE. And as it's at about 7 cents a child, astoundingly low. Of course, it's important to note that there are a lot of other funding sources for environmental education through foundations and other institutions, but not much of that goes into the public school system and kind of formalized environmental education. So, I think that's one of the big questions that we hope that the movie raises, and especially for policy folks or funding folks. What would it look like if we doubled that figure from 7 cents to 14 cents, or if it went to $1 a student, which is still a very small piece of the $18,000 a year pie. But think about the impacts that might have on the fabric of our communities, on the wellness of children. It just really seems like it would be an astonishing return on investment. But I think the issue of defining environmental education is a big one. And so, maybe another sort of takeaway from the movie and a piece of wisdom from Keelan, especially in the film, is I think it's best when we don't get too caught up on the definition. Like, environmental education can be so many different things. It can be kind of a social enterprise in the south side of Chicago. It can be a formal environmental education class at a college in Kentucky. It can be a forest school at Kentucky. It can be a small part of a veteran support program. All of these things are environmental education. And I think it's more important than ever that we have access to it.
Did you find that in some spaces that the word environmental or sustainability was a word that you had to stay away from? I work in the built environment, and I am seeing a lot of what could be interpreted or could be secretly used as environmental education by biophilic design in K-12 or in higher education, or just in living spaces, bringing nature or design aspects of nature into the design of the buildings and the spaces, where in inner cities or something like that, there really isn't room. In some cases, there isn't these vacant lots. So building it into and on the building could be extremely helpful. But we were finding trouble where maybe you had to introduce the film as not something about environmental education.
Yeah. We chose to mostly focus on the idea of nature connectedness, because that is kind of the least likely to offend. Yeah. And it's the most kind of apolitical approach, because it is true that environmental education does touch on sensitive political topics. And so, that's why it's been, pulled into some of the partisan debates, energy and climate and, things like this. And so I think it's important to maybe pause and be intentional about the language. And if we just are okay changing the words from environmental education to nature connectedness or nature-based education, it's all the same thing, so yeah, it's unfortunate, but we do have to remind ourselves of this commonality that we have, which is our own nature and the systems that we all depend on.
Right. Another question? More questions from the audience?
Hello. Beautiful documentary. I just wanted to ask, when it comes to making a documentary, how important is music and the visuals to you in conveying this very important message?
Music and visuals. I mean, this message is all about connectivity. So I think that's what we kind of leaned on, but it was also about pacing in the post-production process. So it was like, okay, like everything has a tension and release. So it's like, okay, cool. How do you build this up, and where's the dramatic moment? And then how do you kind of satisfy the viewer with that? So there's a lot of rhythm with that, but a lot of what James brought to was some more of the musical elements outside of some of the sound design that we were building. It kind of ended uplifting, and that's something that I thought you did really well, bringing in kind of the music tracks and stuff like that. But yeah, it's kind of a dance. It goes through the whole pacing, and it's very important.
Definitely felt that, the crescendos of getting to the positive ends of certain storylines.
Yeah, and I'll just say that much of the sound design originated from Brock, and the music is really important in setting tone in the scenes, and kind of also indicating to audience when a scene is coming to an end and a new one's beginning. But the sound design, especially, it's one of my favorite parts of the movie now. I think about the moment in Chicago where Armani is describing like how much our environment shapes us, and then there's a brief moment where we sort of go to silence, and we're still looking at the south side of Chicago and this vacant lot, and then slowly, we start to hear the nature sounds, and then we start to hear the street sounds, and I think, it's such a powerful way to help an audience empathize with that character, and also just sort of make us aware of all of these little details that create these moments in the story.
Yeah, it's funny because James and I actually had the same high school digital media teacher, and I think he taught both of us showed it's good to tell the story, especially when it's an intricate topic like what we're dealing with here, but it's very much better to show it. So that's where a lot of the music and the sound design goes. It's show the story, don't always tell it. So
Was that one of your? I mean, that's an interesting little moment in the film. Did you have a moment in the film that really stands out to you? It's like, we nailed that.
yeah, I'd have to watch it a couple more times again. It's first time I've seen it in probably a year now.
Oh, really? All right, great. Another question?
Thank you very much for the documentary. That was beautiful. If you could pass one policy or law to help improve environmental education, what would you choose? You've seen a lot of different approach, but if you could just choose one, which one would you pass?
That's a great question. I think it would be, really just formalizing and making it mandatory that nature connectedness and environmental education is a part of the K-12 education curriculum. It's not, so it's not seen as a luxury or an add-on or a niche, but rather fundamental to the objective of educating, children. How that's put into practice in an infinitely complex educational system, I don't know. Maybe why I'm in the film business, not politics. But I think there's so much, just by that funding figure, 7 cents a child, we're basically spending nothing right now doing this. And if we just refocused some money towards this effort and empowered more people to be environmental educators, I think we'd see tremendous benefit, not only in some of the environmental issues that we're all concerned about, but also the whole, all of the other sort of social issues that are a real challenge.
Great. Well, I just want to thank you so much for being here and for submitting your amazing film to our festival. Let's hear it again for In Our Nature. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.